How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the skill capped tier list for patch 1022, created by the insight of multiple challenger players along with the use of the most up-to-date statistics. With season 10 coming to a close in a few weeks, there aren't too many massive changes this patch, but the ones we do have are pretty interesting. Zed and Samira will both see nerfs this patch. LeBlanc is actually getting buffed, and Annie will now have a shield that she can use on herself and her allies. Before we get started, let us know down in the comments below one annoying champion you'd like to see removed from the meta. For most of us at skill capped, it would have to be Lulu. She's actually getting a nerf for this patch, but it's pretty unlikely to remove her completely. And while you're down there, be sure to subscribe and turn notifications on so you never miss another tier list. With all that being said, let's get into it. Starting up in the top lane, we have changes to two different champions. The first one being Nasus. His R bonus resists will be increased from 15 scaling to 55 up to 40 scaling to 70. To compensate a little bit, his R will no longer gain 1 to 3 resistance per second. Overall, this will end up being a really nice buff to Nasus' level 6 dueling potential and skirmish. His overall strength has always been pretty dependent on the elo he's played in. High elo Nasus will still likely remain very niche and a bit underpowered, but for low elo, this change can turn Nasus into one of the best picks. In high elo, we expect him to remain a B tier pick, whereas in low elo, we see him slotting into the S tier. This means his placement on our tier list will be in between those two in the A tier. As we mentioned in the intro, Lulu will be receiving a nerf for this patch, but it's aimed at top lane Lulu instead of support. Top Lulu has been super sleeper OP over the past few patches, as she's held the highest win rate in higher elo. To tone down her bullying power in lane, Riot is nerfing her Q damage scaling, going from 80 scaling to 260 down to 80 scaling to 220. 40 less damage at level 9 is pretty big for a spammable ability, and you will notice a significant drop in your ability to poke and trade for 1022. To be fair though, Lulu's laning strength isn't the main reason to why she's so strong right now. Collecting solo XP and gold up in the top lane allows her to scale so well into the mid game and buff her team insanely well with her immense utility. So even though this change will limit your trading power early on, we don't see it being enough to drop Lulu down on the tier list. We may need to adjust next patch if we miss the mark, but as for now, Lulu will remain in our S tier for top lane. Let's now move on to breaking down the complete top lane tier list. Seeing as there were only 2 changes in this patch, there won't be very much movement. OP tier will still consist of your hard carry bruiser picks, with Urgot leading the way, followed by Fiora, Wukong, and Darius. With Nasus receiving that buff to his ult, we will be moving him into our top 3 picks for low elo, along with Kayle and Urgot. The high priority bans for this patch will remain the same, with Malphite, Darius, and Fiora in the top 3. Moving into the jungle, the Death Singer has proven to be a 1v9 machine in high elo the past few patches, as Karthus has held upwards of a 55% win rate in Diamond and above. As a result, Riot will be giving him a rather light nerf to his Q damage, going from 50 scaling to 130 down to 45 scaling to 125, having just a 5 damage decrease at all ranks. Considering how absurd Karthus is right now in high elo, this nerf won't change anything, and he will continue to dominate the meta, staying in S tier for 1022. A somewhat forgotten jungler throughout most of season 10, Sejuani will be getting a buff to her ultimate damage. The short range damage will get a 25 damage increase at all ranks, going from 100 scaling to 150 up to 125 scaling to 175. The long range damage is being buffed as well, going from 150 scaling to 350 up to 200 scaling to 400. These changes, although small, may be just what Sejuani needs to remind people she still exists, and to get her some more play in 1022. Right now, she struggles pretty heavily in high elo, with her win rate sitting at 46% for Diamond and above, but in low elo she fares much better at around 49%. This buff should be enough to bring Sejuani up into A tier for low elo, but won't quite hit the mark for high elo, so we will be keeping the Fury of the North down in B tier. Just like the top lane, those were the only 2 changes to jungle for 1022. So let's jump into the tier list. Fiddlesticks and Nunu will still remain the go-to picks to climb in the jungle, and to accompany them for this patch will be Khazix. With both Hecarim and Graves being nerfed in 1021, it opened things up more for Khazix to rise in power, which is exactly what he has done. Khazix was on the verge of OP tier in the past few patches, so we feel confident enough to finally give him the leap from S into OP for 1022. The low elo picks of the patch will stay consistent as to where they were in 1021 with Vi, Rammus, and Shyvana. Three of the best bans to prioritize for the jungle right now are Hecarim, Kayn, and Khazix due to their high pick rates and relative strength in the meta. Moving on to the mid lane, we have 4 different changes, starting off with Zed. Zed has held the highest pick rate for any mid laner over the past few patches, while also possessing an extremely high win rate. It was really just a matter of time before Riot decided to nerf him, and his E damage will be the target of this nerf. Zed's E damage will be reduced from 70 scaling to 170 down to 70 scaling to 150. The change is a decent hit to his mid and late game, but the damage stays the same at rank 1, which means his early trading power doesn't become any worse. As a result, Zed won't be shadow slashing his way down the tier list and will remain in our S tier. Another mid lane assassin who will receive some changes is LeBlanc. Unlike Zed though, she's actually getting buffed and the changes are pretty huge. Her E mana cost will be reduced from 70 down to 50. Her E will also see a damage buff going from 40 scaling to 120 up to 50 scaling to 130. And that's not all of it. Her E delayed damage is being increased from 70 scaling to 230 up to 80 scaling to 240. All in all, this ends up being a 20 mana decrease to the spell along with a 20 damage increase. Considering her E is difficult to land, this buff will really help out experienced LeBlanc players the most. If you're able to consistently hit your chains, then your all-in threat will become a lot stronger here for 1022. With this change, LeBlanc will start to see the light of day a little more in solo queue, as she will be moving out of our B tier and into A. Next up, we have Annie with a mini rework to her E. Instead of giving Annie damage reduction, her E will now give her a shield that she can also choose to use on her teammates. I'm smelling some support Annie being cooked up for 1022. Her shield will scale from 40 to 240 and have a 40% AP ratio on it. Her E will now have an 800 cast range on allies, and the mana cost is being increased from 20 up to 40. We'll have to wait and see how this exactly affects Annie's strength, as a change like this makes it hard to judge how much her power level will shift. We initially expect this to be a net buff for Annie, and she will remain in our S tier for mid lane. The final change targeted towards mid lane is to Brand. His passive explosion damage will be changed from 12 to 16% max health down to 10 to 14%. The AP ratio though is being buffed from 1.5% max health per 100 AP to 2% per 100 AP. On top of this change, his E will now always spread to nearby enemies. But to compensate, its spread range is being lowered from 375 to 300. However, the E Blaze effect will double the spread range to 600. The last change that really helps out mid lane Brand is that his R can now bounce back to himself, giving him much stronger solo kill threat in lane. Now keep in mind, despite his theme, Brand hasn't really been on fire in the mid lane recently, as he's been one of the colder mid lane picks for a while now. These changes won't suddenly turn him into an OP mid pick, but they will pull him out of the D tier and into B tier for 1022. Looking at the mid lane tier list, there are no changes to the OP tier for yet another patch. Rumble, Fizz, Nocturne, and Talon all remain extremely good picks to climb with, due to their strong laning presence and ability to impact the map with their priority. Our low elo picks will also see no changes either, with Fizz, Mouse, and Annie remaining the top 3 picks. And the most optimal bans for this patch will still be Yone, Fizz, and Zed, as they are all very strong picks and are played a ton in the meta. Down to the bot lane, we have 4 different ADCs receiving changes. For the second patch in a row, Samira will continue to drop in power, as her base AD and base armor will be nerfed. Her base AD will drop from 59 down to 57, and her base armor will also be decreased by 2, going from 28 to 26. Will this change actually be enough to push Samira down the tier list? Absolutely not. Samira will need at least one more nerf to really solidify her as an A tier pick. So for now, she's going to remain an optimal carry pick in our S tier for 1022. The one ADC receiving a much needed direct buff is Xayah. However, it's pretty underwhelming. Her attack speed per level will be increased from 3.3 up to 3.9%. Take what you can get, but this change won't be enough to significantly increase Xayah's power level for 1022. She's held one of the lowest pick rates and win rates for any ADC over the past few months now, so it's odd that Riot wants to be really conservative in buffing her. We'll give her the nudge out of C tier into B tier for this patch, but she will still remain heavily outclassed by most other ADCs in the game. Ashe will receive a unique change this patch, as the amount of arrows she gets from her W will now scale by rank. Instead of having 9 arrows at all ranks, it will now scale from 7 up to 11 based on rank. This means that it's a nerf to Ashe in the early stages of the game, and then it becomes a buff from level 7 onwards. Due to the nature of the change, we'll have to see how it actually affects her power level. But right now, we don't expect it to significantly change for the next patch, so she will remain in our OP tier. One more ADC receiving a quality of life kind of change is Jinx. Her E will now deal full damage to a target as soon as they are rooted, instead of over 1.5 seconds. This will give her a little more DPS early on, but similar to the Ashe change, it won't be enough to really move her anywhere on the tier list. Jinx will therefore stay put in the S tier for another patch. Taking a look at the ADC tier list, the OP tier will once again consist of MF, Jhin, and Ashe, who are all super strong in the current meta due to their ability to find leads early on with aggressive supports, and transitioning really nicely into the mid game. Our 3 low elo picks will also remain the same as our OP tier, and the best bans for 1022 will be Samira, Ashe, and Caitlyn. To round things out, we don't have any changes directly targeted towards supports for this patch. The changes we mentioned previously though for Brand and Lulu will affect them down in the support role, so let's briefly touch on those. For Lulu, don't expect her to drop in power at all. You max Q last on Lulu support, so the Q damage nerf at later ranks won't even be noticeable. She will remain in our S tier for support. With Brand receiving a bunch of different changes, it's difficult for us to accurately predict where he will land on the tier list. For now, we expect him to remain in the A tier. If this changes throughout the patch, we will be sure to update his placement in the next tier list. With those being the only 2 changes for support, we don't see very much movement in the tier list. OP tier will be locked down by Blitz, Soraka, and Leona. The top low elo picks will consist of Swain, Leona, and Brand, and the most annoying supports you're gonna want to ban out for this patch are Leona, Lulu, and Morgana. Alright, that's gonna be all for this time, guys. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe so you never miss another upload. Good luck with your end of season climbs, and we'll see you in the next video.